You rise with the moon. I rise with the sun.
If I'm not up in the student, I'm fucking his cash off. Don't you know Polo G skinny tall with the dreads, a nigga be rapping his ass off.
So I dug my heels in deeper. My
I am so sorry and ashamed of what I did. I understand.
I was never angry with you.
Every night fucks every day up.
Sad.
Every day patches the night up.
Humans are a constantly adapting species. One day, we like hunting and Big Rock, and another day, we like Kingdom Hearts. This is the blessing and the curse of humanity, the constant changing that everyone experiences. Constantly changing into something new, which is important to live, but never being able to enjoy sitting still for a second. And it is this constant adaptation that gives way to an interesting phenomena, the identity crisis. And today, we're going to be examining the greatest identity crisis. The video is about Zuko.
We get high, we get fat.
Zuko, I just realized Zuko doesn't have a last name. I'm gonna call him Zuko Johnson. Zuko Johnson. Okay, I'm not gonna do that. This is not gonna work. Zuko, just Zuko, is one of the most important characters in Avatar for a number of reasons. He serves as the primary antagonist for a significant chunk of the show. He's one of the most well-written characters in the show, with him and Aang having very similar arcs and experiences. But for the purpose of this video, I want to just stare at one reason, and the reason is that Avatar uses Zuko to display the process of an identity crisis. We watch Zuko go from the banished prince to the blue spirit to an enemy of the Fire Nation to Lee to having regained his honor, not really, to becoming disillusioned with who he's become to...
Hello, Zuko here.
We literally watch Zuko don all of these identities and we witness the effects that it has on him. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I haven't actually explained what an identity crisis is. An identity crisis is defined as a period of uncertainty or confusion in a person's life, which occurs when a person's sense of identity is unstable. And this is exactly how I see Zuko's character. Constantly unsure of himself and constantly trying to figure out who he should be, so much so that he would often end up in real physical turmoil battling his own mind. It was that constant inner battle that made Zuko such a well-written, compelling character. From early on in Book 1, we stopped seeing him as just the villain. And speaking for myself, I stopped seeing him as the villain in general. From my point of view, he seemed like just a kid trying to do whatever he could do to fix his life. And it was that identity of the banished prince trying to regain his honor that was ingrained in the audience's mind. But ultimately, that's not who Zuko is.
I don't got change for 20, nigga, 20 ain't nothing but change. You hear what I'm saying?
Zuko embodies a number of different identities on his journey to regain his honor. And that's something that needed to happen because the only way you can escape an identity crisis is to find your identity. And like everything else in life, that's a process of trial and error. You can't find your face without trying on a few masks. For Zuko, this meant fighting against the Fire Nation, and then betraying Iroh, and then switching up and working with Team Avatar, and then all of these trials and tribulations were in the pursuit of finding his identity. But it was these identity crises that made him such an interesting character. With the exception of Zuko, Iroh, and maybe Zhang as well, firebenders are giant assholes. But Iroh and Zhang both ended up finding a kinder life philosophy after years of combat. Zuko, after being banished and hunted by the Fire Nation, and being forced to live among people he thought were his enemies, realized that the war wasn't as black and white as he thought, which is part of the reason why he ended up on his path to redemption. Zuko realized that the people in front of him weren't his enemies like he was taught, and it shook everything he thought he knew. He came to realize that they were just people, and this is something he couldn't have learned without questioning his identity. From the time he was a child, Zuko never really fit the mold of a royal firebender. He was kind, he wasn't a particularly skilled fighter, and he cared about the citizens of the Fire Nation. Also, he burned too easily. Based on this, you can probably say that this was the groundwork for the identity crises he would later face. This kid is trying to fit the mold that everyone expects him to, but instead who he is the complete opposite.
Imagine me messing it up. It's like Mohegan Sun, how I'm testing my luck. I gotta be next on the...
As people, we spend a lot of time trying to fit in. And fitting into a certain group means that your identity has to reflect the values of that group. But a lot of times, who you are is going to be at odds with that group. Speaking from personal experience, there have been many times I've tried to fit in with a particular group, only to realize later that who I am and what this group is don't make sense together. I was able to figure out who I was through those trials and errors the same way that Zuko did. I remember watching Avatar for the first time and watching Zuko betray Iroh, and all I could think was, I wish your dad burned your other eye, you piece of shit. But looking back on it now, I think that betrayal was necessary because it showed Zuko his critical error, and it finally was made clear the Fire Nation is immoral, and he needed to be part of the solution to change it, not just be the guy in power. Zuko is a fundamentally good person, brought up in an environment that is fundamentally cruel. It makes sense why he would be enduring these identity crises later in his life. It makes sense why, after achieving what he thought were his goals and dreams, he begins questioning if he even knows the difference between right and wrong anymore. This is what an identity crisis does. It forces you to confront everything you thought you knew, even the small basic stuff. It forces you to combat who you are, so you can figure out who you will be. The creators of Avatar recognized this, and they ingrained it into Zuko, not for the sake of cruelty, but because a big theme in Avatar is people from different nations coming together. And someone like Zuko, who's from the Fire Nation, having really similar arcs and experiences to people like Aang and Katara, is a big part of what makes his character's identity crises so important. Finding out who you are, or who you need to be, is never easy. In fact, it can end up becoming one of the most difficult and painful things for a person to do. Zuko experienced this firsthand through the identity crises that he faced, and because of these crises, he was able to become someone who people could not only rely on, but look up to. However, Zuko wouldn't have been able to become that person unless he went through those trials. Without the betrayal of Iroh, he wouldn't have been able to find out that his real destiny was to teach Aang firebending and become one of the main reasons that the war ended. Zuko never forgot who he was just blinded along the way, and he had to find out who he was by confronting his struggles and crises head on, and he was able to finally act on the words that he read as a child.
Note the inscription and the superior craftsmanship.
Never give up without a fight.